everybody, welcome to today's live stream. Today is Monday, November 28th, and we're going to talk about the protest that's been springing up across China in the recent days. And let's just say it's a lot of different protests in a scale that we probably haven't seen before for a very long time, since 1989 perhaps. So let's talk about them. Where do we even begin? Basically, the series of protests started happening after the apartment fire in Xinjiang on, I believe it was a few days ago. And then basically the death of 10 plus people, as reported by the officials, translated into what some sources are saying is actually 40 plus people in the apartment. And that kind of became the trigger for these series of protests because of the 3 years that China has been essentially under lockdown in various different cities, with millions of people put onto stay-home order, or they're inside quarantine, told to stay home basically. And so there's a growing sentiment of anger, of despair in China. And so over the weekend, many people, especially people in universities, started to protest, and then that's where we're going to start today. Now, the protest has quickly spiraled into something called A4 revolution. A4 is in the size of the paper, and people were actually just holding up these pieces of paper, as we see here, that shows, you know, whatever the message they're trying to say. Of course, they're not going to do it because the media is not on their side, and the Chinese police force will obviously be arresting them. So they just hold up blank pieces of paper to say that whatever message that we want to convey to people, they already know what's written on these white pieces of paper. So this is, as our title today suggests, it's the white paper revolution in China. But this, of course, has been happening for a very long time, even back during the Cold War. I remember there was a joke about how a Russian held up a piece of, or I think he was giving out away flyers, but they were actually just empty white pieces of blank paper. And then when he got arrested by the KGB, they're asking him, why were you giving away these flyers? He says, well, basically I have nothing written on them, but whatever message I was trying to convey, people already know. So the same thing's happening in China. And throughout all this, there's actually some key points to know. So the major cities in China, like I said, it's a massive amount of protest in the scale we haven't seen on, before, at least in recent decades. The last one we saw, it was in Beijing, 1989, June 4th. That, of course, ended with casualties of students. But the same thing's happening this time, where you have students across China's top universities, or at least people that age, that come out and start holding these paper signs with nothing written on them. Some of them do have stuff written on them, which I'll talk about. But basically, you have the protest in Urumqi, which is the capital of Xinjiang, which is where that apartment fire happened. You also have that happening in Beijing, in Shanghai, Wuhan, Chengdu, Hangzhou, Chongqing, and other cities. So you're looking at pretty much a spontaneous, disorganized, this type of movement happening in China without really the centralized organization overlooking it. And a lot of people are just doing this for the sake of doing it because they're just fed up with whatever the authority has been doing to the people, so that they're angry and they must say something about it. And let's continue with this because it gets more interesting. Now, the people that this was happening at, so for example, in this picture here, it's happening at Tsinghua University, which is a top university, number 1 or number 2 in China. And this is actually 2 professors here that are, I guess you would say, protecting the students from being arrested by the security forces, which you can see. It's pretty shocking. And then you also have pictures like this. By the way, these are all taken from videos and various sources on Twitter. As you know, Chinese state media, they've essentially hasn't been covering this at all. Just because they're not mentioning it doesn't mean things aren't happening, right? And so this is happening. And then let's kind of briefly talk about the timeline of this, because I think it's very worthy to talk about when these sort of events, which dates it transpired. So let's do that quickly. This is October 13th, I believe. Yeah, so there's a guy that held up a sign. He put up these banners over a bridge in Beijing called Sitong Bridge. And on those bridge banners, he basically said, I think along the lines of no COVID test, we want freedom, Xi Jinping, the Chinese leader, has to step down. And then we had the 20th Party Congress, which happened about 7 days after that on the 20th, which concluded. And then the protest in Tibet against COVID happened in late October. And then we saw the Foxconn crisis, which was another one, right? That was a huge trigger in China for, you had millions of workers walk out of the factory compound making iPhone parts. So suddenly you have Foxconn losing hundreds of thousands of workers. They had to replace that. So then you had a second wave of Foxconn workers come in, but then there was another protest. So that number of workers left again. And then you had protest in Guangzhou, you had the protest in Chongqing, now then you had the protest in over the fire in Xinjiang, and then now you have all the protests following that. So where we are today is actually it's a more physical representation of how angry the Chinese people really feel, because for 3 years they've essentially been lied to by the Chinese Communist Party, who says, we're doing this for your health and for your sake, for your safety, and we're doing this to serve the people, in their words. And then they're also saying that these things, supposedly like temporary lockdown, would turn from a week lockdown into a month lockdown, into 2 months and 3 months. Like Xinjiang, before this whole event happened with the apartment fire, they've been under lockdown for at least 4 months. And so people are clearly, they recognize that the Chinese Communist Party is the one that's really been lying to them, right? For whatever reason. So basically the legitimacy of this so-called zero COVID model, which is mass testing, lockdown, and this QR code, right? Like wherever you go, you're being tracked for your health status. All of that is being slowly, it's collapsing within the minds of a lot of the Chinese people, who are basically, finally getting worked up over what is essentially a suppression of basic human freedom for 3 years. And zero COVID has been the most legitimate way for the CCP to maintain power, right? If you think about it, you give up, you surrender all of your rights for the sake of public health, and you're able to control and take away people's basic human rights. Not that there were any for the Chinese people before that, sadly as it is, but that's been amplified under zero COVID, because everything can be put under this umbrella term of health crisis, right? Anything you want to do, like the economy doesn't matter, health crisis. Human lives doesn't matter, health crisis. You lock somebody in their dorm for 3 weeks, it doesn't matter. They don't get food or water, health crisis, right? So anything they can justify with this lockdown thing, they've been trying to do in China. And so it's been the perfect power concentration tool for the Chinese leaders. It's been the perfect way to control the people, and it's not something that's going to end very soon, right? And so now we're seeing a lot of these young college educated students come out. In Shanghai, for example, they were protesting at this one road called Outrage Road. So I'm going to show you 2 videos here, just so we know what exactly what kind of situation we're looking at, okay? This is the first one. So this is, let me first go to that here. Okay, so this is a young man standing in Shanghai, and he's blocking I think that's an ambulance, and then he quickly just gets taken away by the officials, dragged, and likely he was arrested, and that's the end of him, right? So this is during the protest where everybody kind of walked out onto the street and started shouting things like, we want freedom, etc., etc. And then earlier during this, there was another video, which I will show you now. Let's see here. This is a guy that was just holding up a sunflower, okay, during the day. So I'll play that out. He was literally holding a sunflower on the street of Shanghai, in the street of Shanghai, and as you can see here, he's now being cornered by the securities, and all he's saying is, we have to stay strong, we have to say our rights, etc., right? And he's just walking around. He's not really causing any trouble. Right? You have all these people looking at him, and there's nobody like really, he's not causing violence or whatever. And then watch what happens. So those people in yellow vests, they're like the regular security, but the plainclothes ones are actually the secret police, right? Like sort of that actually do the dirty work. If you take a look here, see how there's the guy here, these 2 people, they're the ones who grab him and then take him away. Right? All the other ones are just kind of helping him. Look. So it's very typical in China for you to see whenever there's these kind of public events, you see people dressed in clearly, like obviously they know they're cops or they're security forces. The people that are more dangerous are the plainclothes cops, right? So let's continue a little bit with what we're talking about. So that was in Shanghai, and you can see in this picture here on the left side of my screen that there's actually these armored white tank vehicle, not tanks, armored vehicles like our Hummers and stuff that are being shipped into Shanghai in anticipation of further protests, right? Because whenever you have these events, like today while we're doing the live stream, we're actually looking at the events that had happened the night before in China. So we're about 8 hours behind what was actually happening on the ground. So by our afternoon and late evening, that's when we start getting news for the next day, just because of the time difference. But what we know from last night's protest was that things started to die down either after people were arrested by police, or after people were just dispersed because, you know, people get arrested, and so most people just kind of leave, right? But what was happening in Shanghai actually triggered a lot of backlash for the CCP. Unfortunately, because they had arrested, let's see here. They had arrested a BBC reporter. Okay, so I'm going to show you the video here. Let's see. I'm going to post that. This is the video. Okay, let me just delete these for now. Okay, so this is what happened last night. With a BBC reporter named Ed Lawrence, I believe is his name. So let's go to that here. So this was him being arrested by cops in Shanghai last night. Guess what the excuse they were using was? He was going to be infected by people around him with COVID if we didn't take care of him. So he got rushed away by the cops here, and then it's very interesting, okay? If you take a look at what's been happening here, they arrest a BBC journalist. It's unlikely they didn't know that, so they knew that he was somebody that is a part of the media. They have every right to report and record whatever is happening on the ground. But by arresting him, you're almost like you're saying, you bring it to yourself that there is something fishy going on here, right? But they do this often. And then, you know, whenever they get reporters in trouble, obviously that parent organization of the particular reporter, in this case the BBC, come out and they say a statement. Here's what it says. It says, BBC statement on Ed Lawrence. Quote, the BBC is extremely concerned about the treatment. Here, let me just, here, okay. About the treatment of our journalist Ed Lawrence, who was arrested and handcuffed while covering the protest in Shanghai. He was held for several hours before being released. During his arrest, he was beaten and kicked by the police. This happened while he was working as an, let me see here. Oh my. I think there's a lot of sound. Let me just, sorry, I need to fix something here. Oops, that's not it. Okay, that's media source. Nope. Okay, there we go. Says he, accredited journalist. It is very worrying that one of our journalists was attacked in this way. Whilst carrying out his duties, we have had no official explanation or apology from the Chinese authorities, beyond a claim by the officials who later released him that they had arrested him for his own good in case he caught COVID from the crowd. We do not consider this a credible explanation. So what you're basically telling the BBC and everybody else around the world is the fact that you arrested this person for his safety, okay? If that stopped working with the Chinese people, do you think that's going to work with the Western media or anybody that basically has gone away with not, you know, there's no more COVID for quite a while now, and you're saying this? That seems very fishy, right? So there's also the protest in Beijing, and let's look at this video here. There's a lot of videos to show because, well, basically there's a lot of evidence, video evidence if you want to call it, of the cops. Like what they're doing now is they're trying to stop the voice of the people, right? So these people are, this is a march toward Tiananmen Square, I believe, according to that. Yeah, so, and they're basically saying, we want freedom, equality, democracy, rule of law. We don't want dictatorship. We don't want personality cult. And all of these are targeting the Chinese regime, right? Like they're basically saying, we don't agree with what you're doing now with zero COVID, And remember, these are still the same people who are like college-age students. So it's not like all of China is doing this. And I think let's just briefly talk about what's the next step for the regime, right? In the past, we always get the perception that, under the Chinese Communist Party, the Chinese people, they've lost the willingness to protest or don't even have the experience of political actions, right? And the 3 years of the pandemic would have actually killed that even more, considering we didn't get these protests until very recently. And what has happened is it seems like people are exhausted, and the public grievances and the accumulation of anger, let's just say, has boiled over, right? So this type of events really exceeded everybody's expectations, because you wouldn't expect something to happen today with so much digital surveillance in China, with so much authoritarianism going around, that protest is something that's would still happen on such a massive scale across China with very little organization. The white paper revolution is a signal that all across China, people seem to have this common desire for freedom. And that's very brave and courageous, right? And the state media, like I said, they've only kept silent because they know the more reporting they do, the more problems it causes. But the lack of reporting that they do also causes problem. So this reflects on a reality that the Chinese Communist Party is going through such a bind, right? They thrive on building legitimacy. Legitimacy is basically how they rule. It's like saying the party is always right, the communist officials are always right. And so it's a very hard thing for them to comprehend, as we can actually go back on our mistake or go review our mistakes and go back on our policies, right? Like, they don't understand that. That's not a thing for the Chinese Communist Party. Basically, every time they do something, it has to go from a victory to a victory, like a win to a win, right? We successfully fought off COVID. We won a soccer game, or we developed this technology and then we surpassed our military strength. Like, they can't have a failure in place, because what happens is once you tell people that you have failed, the illusion about the Communist Party gets destroyed, right? So then people start questioning. Of course, back in the days, we had more money. The Chinese Communist Party had more money to give to the people. So there was that sense of, as long as I have money, the Chinese people have money, there's no reason for us to kind of break this mirage, right? Things got a little bit more fickle and shallow because crude nationalism, right? What Xi Jinping has been ruling on for the last 2 years is it easily crumbles once you see a little sign of weakness. People are recognizing that zero COVID is not the regular, normal way to do things. So they're recognizing weakness within the regime. Now, what does the regime do from here? They, either say, we made mistakes, we're going to relax, lift the lockdown orders, and then things will go back to normal. They can't do that. The only other alternative to this is protesting, destroy the protesters who are protesting, by means of violent arrests, violent clashes, or even rolling tanks down the street. Of course, I don't see the tanks come in yet, because to be honest, this is not to the scale where it's going to impact the stability of the regime yet. If it gets worse, then that's when things will get really, really dangerous. But any regime that you look around the world, including free worlds, governments, right? Everyone has to have a degree of being able to stomach failure, or being able to digest failure from time to time. You have to be able to recognize your mistakes. The CCP has shown that it's unwilling to accept failures in any means necessary, using any means necessary to control that, right? And so what you saw in 1989, in June 4th on Tiananmen Square, was the fact that the regime thought the only way for us to go forward is the survival of the party must come before anything else, right? Whether that's the international backlash that they got from suppressing the students, or the fact that Chinese people really recognize that they're willing to fire on their own people, none of that matters if the Communist Party falls. And to them, the survival of the Communist Party is the #1 core issue of the entire regime. So to do that, they're willing to kill people. They're willing to sacrifice human lives. And they've shown in history every single time that what they resort to most of the times is actually violence and bloodshed. And that's just the nature of communism in a nutshell, right? It's just whenever you have to do something that is drastic, it's not going to be peaceful. And this is different from like a revolution where you have you have obviously you're fighting for a cause away from authoritarianism or away from totalitarianism. This one is actually within the totalitarian system already. It's just like a self-scraping, a self-inflicting wound, but that wound is, to the CCP, is like how you get better, how you heal better, in their sense, right? In everybody else's mind, it's like you're crazy for doing this. So anyways, let's kind of continue a little bit more before we finish down here. So there's protests happening in Beijing, and then there's also protests across China. You have them happening in Kashgar as well, which is, I'll show you this video real quickly. Let's see here. So this is happening in Kashgar, which is in Xinjiang as well. You see protesters being beaten up, and they literally gang up on this woman who's filming. And then it's pretty shocking. Like the fact that they're see, they just push her over and then grab her, arrest her and stuff. So the white garb COVID guards, they're still police. They're just health police, right? They're still regular police, but they're like enforcing the COVID rules and stuff. But you see people are fighting back. They don't like what they're seeing in China, right? And then Selena Wang, who is a CNN reporter, has been on the ground in Beijing in recent days, and she's been basically reporting on the situation. So it says here, a surreal night in Beijing. Protesters chanted no to COVID test, yes to freedom for hours. Some cheered for Xi Jinping to step down. After 2 a.m., police presence ramped up. I asked what they'd do if people didn't leave. Would they use tear gas? He just said, please go home. So the situation is tense. This map here shows that all of China, basically along the eastern coastline, you have protests all the way from top to bottom, north to south, and then across the I guess you would call this southwest region, but it's more like south middle region of China. There's demonstrations or protests in some degrees. And again, most of them is happening in the university population, okay? And then last bit of our stream, we have to talk about the some of the fine details, let's just call it. So remember, what caused the apartment fire in Xinjiang in Urumqi was actually because they had locked the apartment door with a wires of some sort. Like they either wrapped the handles around it, or like in this picture here, they actually physically kind of tie it to the side here, so you can't even open the handle. Or turn the handle in a way. And then I'll show you exactly what they do in some apartments here in this video. Here. Okay, let's go to this one here. Okay, so she is in Beijing, and when she was locked inside, this is what happens to her door. Here, she cannot use the door at all. It's been locked inside and outside. And then she's got a chain here that stops her from using the fire exit. Okay, so this is the chain the fire exit door is also completely shut. So in this case, if there was actually a fire, she would not be able to escape from her apartment. So now you can understand why the Chinese regime is lying to us, basically saying that, oh, those people in the apartment fire that died had no awareness, they couldn't save themselves. That's just a lie, because you basically have no way for people to get out. You locked everything, right? Okay, so there's also a Biden statement from the National Security Council in the White House. Says, we've said that zero COVID is not a policy we're pursuing here in the United States. And as we've said, we think it's going to be very difficult for the People's Republic of China, which is the Chinese Communist Party, to be able to contain the virus through this zero COVID strategy. For us, blah, 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 we're focused on what works. And that means using public health tools like continuing to enhance vaccination rates, including boosters, and making testing and treatment easily accessible. So the United States has basically spoken, although a lot of people are calling this like a weak statement. You should be condemning the people in China. The United Nations actually came out today also with a statement saying that China needs to protect the peaceful protesters, allow them to basically continue protesting. We'll see how if that goes. And then you have situations where they're basically blaming the United States and Western nations for starting a color revolution in China because, kids are protesting. And then Twitter, they're flooding it with bots. Like these accounts, basically they're all like porn spams on Twitter. So whenever you try to search for a city in like Shanghai, you just get porn spams. So it's pretty sad situation. But basically, the general gist of it is that there's more protest coming in China, and it's going to be something we have to closely follow. So make sure tomorrow we're going to do another live stream on the latest details. So make sure you subscribe to the channel, and also make sure to like the video so that more people can see it. But also comment below what you think is happening in China and where this is all going. So I hope you enjoyed today's live stream. This is David Zhang. We're with State Politics. And if you are watching on YouTube, make sure to subscribe and also comment below what you'd like to see next. And turn on the notification bell as well. Okay, that's it for today's stream. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.